Are you an ambitious leader ready to break through limiting beliefs, align with your purpose, and thrive in your career without sacrificing your well-being or postponing your true desires? I'm Diana Ordonez, certified high-performance coach and your host. Each week, we'll dive into actionable insights and research-based strategies to help you unlock clarity, build unshakable confidence, and take courageous action toward a life of impact and fulfillment. If you're ready to overcome fear, embrace growth, and step boldly into your next level, you're in the right place. Let's create a life filled with courage and purpose together. Hi, everyone. I am here with Tyler Capps today, and I'm so excited because he has such exciting insights that I really am excited to dig into regarding personality. He's also going to talk about his journey. I met Tyler. Now it feels like forever ago. Earlier this year, right? Oh, 2 years ago.
I think so. It's flying.
Oh my gosh. It is going by so fast. So I met Tyler because he reached out to me on LinkedIn. He was working on an exciting new platform, which he named Sophonaut with his partner. And this platform was meant to connect the ideal coach for their ideal client based on personality types, right? And so Tyler reached out to me to interview me and to find out if this would be a good way for us to kind of help each other, get some feedback about how I was going about getting my ideal client into my practice, and then also just to kind of brainstorm. And we've kind of caught up with each other through various parts of that journey. And it's just been exciting to watch all the learnings, kind of how that transitioned into coaching one-on-one. And then you did some group coaching before that. And I also know that now you've actually started to do some consulting work as you reflected back on that journey, and still excited to hear about what plans you might have to go back and really dig into that platform. But I'll let you speak to what that platform, what the vision for that platform was, so that you can kind of talk about your vast expertise in the data collection part and all the fascinating insights about why specifically you wanted to apply that aspect of personality to coaching. And so I'll let you dive in.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Always fun to chat with you, and we'll try to cut ourselves short. We can usually go for hours, so we won't do that to you all. But where it started was me and my business partner creating a new or like an updated version of the 5-factor model, which is like the industry gold standard of assessing personality in a way that's useful, not just some like, what Harry Potter house are you, right? Which is useful, and if you want to have fun, but like, what do you do with it? Like, you can't like pick up a wand and start doing wizardly things. But so we built a personality assessment that aimed to correct on this academic gold standard, because there was some bias in it, that if you have biased results, you're not having the best information to guide your decision making. And if you know your personality really well, you can understand what is working with you and working against you, and take really good advantage of that to just get to your goals much faster and with way less pain. So that's where it started. It was like, let's help the individual human by giving them this amazing tool that if they absorb all of that info, they can have tremendous growth in their life. The way we built it was a little too much. Like there's a lot of text. So like you basically have like a library on yourself. No one wants to read that. They're like, give me the good stuff quickly. So we quickly realized that we need to add a human element, because people also, and like having interviewed a bunch of folks, they like talking to people. They don't want to feel like they're alone in some computer, which is part of the problem, honestly. And so I started reaching out to folks like you to see maybe the missing link is putting this tool in the hands of experts to guide these folks with deeper insights than the coach is used to having, right? Like they basically have a cheat sheet to like why this person is in whatever situation they're in and the habits that got them there. With the ultimate goal of if we can do that enough, pair enough coaches with enough clients, first of all, we're helping tons of people by making that experience go quicker and have better results. But we can also get this training data, which is like a techie term for information we need to improve our software model so
Mhm.
that maybe we could just still deliver this as an app for a person to have an expert like Diana in their pocket, helping them get to where they want to be, but at a significantly lower price point. Because not everyone can afford 100, 2, 3, $5,000 an hour, whatever it is. So that was the long-term goal.
Yeah. So long-term vision, getting the as many people access to coaching as possible, right? So they can transform their lives.
Yeah.
And I remember when we first spoke and you told me all about personality types and how that helps people um, become more successful. One of the
Mhm.
things that I said to you, well, you know, I don't I don't subscribe to this to this belief that personality is so locked in. I don't feel like I need to know someone's personality to be able to coach them because I feel like that means that you are narrowing down their possibilities, right? Like I
Mhm.
said, I believe, right, that we can be anything that we want to be. And so by giving them the label of what their personality type was, I felt like that kind of put them in a box and then told them that they couldn't change their personality. And so we dug into that a little bit. You talked about how, the awareness was really helpful. And you also talked about how changes in personality happen. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that and what you found as you started to do these with actual clients, these
Mhm.
personality type assessments, and then used them to help in your coaching.
Yeah. So just to give folks some more, like, I guess, insight into that conversation is that uh, personality is very difficult to shift, not impossible. Um, but it's not like the goal on our end wasn't to put people in a box. It was to understand where things currently are in terms of like general disposition to behave or want to behave a certain way, right? Like you may be highly extroverted, but it doesn't mean you're every single moment of every day doing extrovert things like just hanging out with 1,000 people or always doing something social. It just means you tend to, or at least want to, more than the average bear. So that was the usefulness of this specific personality test. It's relative to population. But anyway, the goal is let's get a snapshot because that's what you end up doing informally in coaching anyway, is like try to get a sense of how they tend to behave, which we just capture in the word personality, how people tend to behave. And then with that and where the person's trying to go, so like maybe they're trying to reduce anxiety while pursuing a new job. Okay, well, it's good to know from your personality test that you are more impulsive than 80% of the population, right? That means like that's highly correlated with eating sweets or drinking or smoking and things like that, like doing something for stimulation, which also tends to result in higher anxiety. So you can use that information when giving uh, either recommendations or guiding questions that help the client think through how to address that, whether it's actually shifting your core uh, personality, as I think you would say that, like to change that part of the personality, or to create buffers and tools that prevent you from falling into certain pitfalls of aspects of personality. So yeah, I guess there's different approaches to it. And like the shifting personality requires more of like a cognitive behavior therapy over a long period of time to shift that. And most people don't have that kind of like, most people want the result now, you know? And so that's why we're not trying to change personality. We're trying to work with what they tend to do and then give them tools that like fit that configuration of who they are now.
Interesting. So I hear you say that there are certain aspects of personality that lead to certain types of, I guess, feelings like anxiety, right? Like,
Well, so yeah, there's high correlations between certain. So anxiety is another like subcomponent. We call it facet of the greater neuroticism personality trait. And within the trait, most of the facets or subcomponents are highly correlated. They tend to go with each other. But like, I
mhm.
mean, I think most people like can intuitively understand if you're more impulsive and you tend to eat more sugar than someone, then you tend to also have sugar crashes and be a little more irritable. And that kind of can spiral into like more anxiety and things like that.
Yeah. So I didn't expect this conversation to go in this direction, but
Uh-huh.
it's coming up for me because there was a time in my kind of like healing journey that I started to learn a lot about um, like complex trauma and
Mm.
how that manifests in coping behaviors. And
Yep.
when I started to learn a lot about this, I started to actually question what aspects of my behaviors were my real personality versus just coping behaviors,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm wondering like what your take is on that, like based on the research that you've done, because I know you are very well versed in all things personality. So
Mm.
I'm just wondering what if you found any literature on that.
Well, you also, yes, you also touched on one of the two. There's like almost only two ways to really change, like have significant changes in personality: cognitive behavior therapy over a long period of time, or trauma, like an extreme event that causes a huge psychological, physiological shift. So you may have actually shifted your personality through whatever you were going through, if it was like in a very intense psychological event, which sounds like it was. Um, but I wouldn't be able to know unless I like you actually wanted to like share what's going on and dive into it, whether or not it was a shift in your personality or if you were trying to like do things to suppress the extreme pain of the current situation.
So you said two important things that I'd like to address. The first one, you said, well, if you have a very traumatic event, that could
Hmm.
shift you in a big way as far as personality goes. And so I would agree with that. And when I talk about like complex PTSD, I'm really talking about not big events. They're in a lot of cases, they are small events over long periods of time that feel very big in because they happen in childhood, right? Like when you don't have control or, the ability to care for yourself like you would as an adult. And
Hmm.
so if you talk about complex trauma, you're really talking about a time where you felt that you couldn't care for yourself. And for a long time, you processed your caretaker's inability to show up for you, whether it be like actually physically show up for you or emotionally show up for you.
Hmm.
And so complex trauma a lot of times gets like completely disregarded as not actual trauma because they say it's not a big traumatic event, right? And so
Hmm.
a lot of times what I found is that those behaviors that we develop to suppress that pain, that was the second thing that you said,
Yep.
um, from when you were a child, and it seemed for maybe everybody else that was telling you you should not feel that way, or you shouldn't cry, or you shouldn't, or what are you complaining about? It's not that bad, or whatever it is, minimizing the trauma, you suppress the the emotional experience, and then you start to develop coping behaviors for anything that signals to your nervous system that you're about to experience something that doesn't
Yeah.
feel safe, right?
Yeah.
And
So that's
so,
that's that. Oh, sorry. Keep going.
oh no, so I was just gonna say, there's so many things that I thought were like my personality, like
Hmm.
being an overachiever, a type A personality, or when you talk about like it reminded me of the five personality types include things like introversion, and while I completely understand introversion and extroversion to mean, when you feel most energized versus when
Hmm.
you feel like your energy is being drained, I also recognize that some of the traits of my introversion, like some of the characteristics, the behaviors, were highly tied to this like sensitivity to feeling rejected, right? And things like
Hmm.
that. And
Hmm.
so a lot of behaviors that I thought were my personality actually were tied very closely to these coping mechanisms that I subconsciously developed that I had no like real awareness of. And so that's one of the things that I think about when we talk about what our personalities are.
Hmm.
Um, and I know you had something that you wanted to that like spark something in you. I'm really curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. So it's well, there's a few things. One is when people say it's not that big of a deal or XYZ, uh, it prevents if you take that to heart, it prevents your ability to appropriately process what's happening and
Right.
actually get beyond it in a healthy way that you're no longer dwelling on it or trying to process it. Right.
Right.
Like, so like unresolved trauma tends to mean that it hasn't been fully processed
Right.
and internalized in a way that you have now grown into who you need to be. So that was one thing. The other thing is uh, the separation of like personality from just what you do. I think sometimes people take personality, say, oh, it means you act this way all the time. But
Hmm.
that the truer definition is that you are you have a desire to act this way. Like that's how you are
Hmm.
inclined. But there's this other layer on that called characteristic adaptations, meaning yes, maybe you are inclined, maybe you're meant to be more of an extrovert during your childhood or in this hypothetical person's childhood, but they needed to adapt to their situation by being more introverted to prevent whatever harm came in during those extroverted moments. Right.
Hmm.
So again, it's hard to talk about it without the specifics, but the characteristic adaptations are a layer on basically adjusting to your environment. So like one is learning a language. You could say like, yeah, like we're not born speaking English or Spanish or whatever. You adapt to your environment. And then part of what you could say how you behave around others in a traumatic environment is a language you've learned. That if you act that way over a long enough period of time, it can become part of your general tendency. So then in that way you may have a personality shift. It's hard to tell without talking to that person
Yeah.
where the line is for them.
So let's try to maybe pick one, right? Like, so
Mhm.
maybe there was a time in my life where I was primarily very like pessimistic, right? And
Mhm.
I called it realistic.
Yep.
Right. I was just a realist. I was just seeing things as they were. Um, and I thought that that was like part of who I was, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and honestly, that only shifted probably, probably once I started getting deeper into um, like personal development.
Mhm.
Because I had already, the interesting thing about that is I had already done my undergrad in psychology and my master's in industrial organizational psychology. And I had already written like my final paper on CBT, cognitive behavior therapy.
Mhm.
And yet, I guess I so closely associated to this way of being as a good thing, like I was being realistic. But I would say, right, that that was probably a characteristic adaptation because of that fear of not being in control, right? Like not knowing what was going to happen was very
Yeah.
scary. And so then I had to predict what was going to happen to create safety for myself, right? And then so I had this tendency to kind of um, like behave in a way that kept me safe. And I think a lot of what we do as coaches is like recognize when that's what people are doing is they're trying to
Yeah.
create safety for themselves by feeling in control and they create these beliefs that keep them where they are so that they're safe, but sometimes that means like people think that these characteristic adaptations are their personality. Another example might be, I just don't like change,
Hmm.
right? Like I just like things to stay the same. So what would you say, like, are these two things similar? Are they different? Are they personality? Are they adaptations?
Again, it depends. So like for like because you peppered one in at the end that tends to be like related to openness.
Hmm.
Like openness is kind of self-explanatory. Like you're actually open to new ideas and experiences, and you want things to change. Like you thrive on it versus
Right.
you're more down to earth. Like you're like I like consistency. Like I like what I
Mhm.
like, and I like it. I don't want it to change. Like I'll have chocolate ice cream every night. I don't need Neapolitan or chocolate chip or anything. Um, but then going into the earlier example, part of that is yeah, there's so much exciting stuff in here because it may have started as a characteristic adaptation
Hmm.
that became a trained pattern like neurologically. So like if you started off actually like the assumption there is if it wasn't a personality trait that before some event you were optimistic and actually had positive views of future outcomes, right? Which is a component of extroversion. Or like you have positive emotions and then you associate that with the future as well. But it sounds like it may have been interrupted at some point, and then you became more quote unquote realistic, which it sounds like we both heard, which is essentially a synonym for pessimistic.
Yeah.
Um, and that's in yours. If you were, well, I guess to ask, were you more optimistic before at some point, or were you all like up until a more recent change? Were you always more realistic?
See, this is where like I struggle with this, right? Because when we're born, we have no reason not to think good things are going to happen, right? Like before anything ever happens to us, we have
Hmm.
no reason to believe that there's going to be negative outcome unless something bad happened to us, right? I mean, my
Partially. Partially, because there is a genetic component to personality, like
okay.
a large genetic component. So then, if you could say, if someone is lower, and slow me down if I'm just using too much personality terms, but positive emotions is a component of extroversion. If a child has lower predisposition to having positive emotions and a higher disposition to being neurotic, like having uh, vulnerability, meaning like stimuli affect them more greatly than other babies. And if they're vulnerable and anxious, that could mean that when they receive stimuli, they expect it to result in bad feelings.
Hmm.
That is like somewhat personality related.
So what comes up for me when you talk about that is the idea of like neurodivergence and the highly sensitive child or
Mhm.
um, just a very sensitive nervous system, right?
Yeah, because like I mean,
So,
you've been around babies; they're not all the same, even super early on,
mhm.
right? Yeah.
Well, what I and so. I love these conversations because it kind of is able to, everyone that's in this field kind of has their own um, like aspects of personal development that they dig deeper into. And so
Hmm.
you can combine all of this and come up with maybe a fuller picture when you talk to different people about all the different aspects of their expertise. And so one thing that I've learned though, as someone that is neurodivergent and somebody that would have been kind of considered a highly sensitive child and as a mother of a highly sensitive child, what I've learned is that yes, that is a aspect that is kind of in your genetic makeup,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
right, and there are things that you can do to signal safety to your nervous system, and there
Yeah.
is definitely ways that um, it's not just because of your genetics out of
Yeah.
nowhere, like that your genetics are made up of probably years and years and years of other people's trauma too, right? And so like the more I dug
Yeah.
into this stuff, like the more it felt like it our personality isn't so much like our personality, and it is some response to trauma. And if you kind of like work through the trauma, you can kind of decide like what kinds of ways you want to think, what kind of behaviors you want to adapt.
Hmm.
um, and part of that this conversation is going all over, but part of addressing the trauma is actually, like you said, fully processing the emotions
Hmm.
that resulted of that trauma. And when you do things, and I don't know how you feel about like EMDR or anything that kind of engages, um, the ability to form new neural connections,
Hmm.
both the logical side of your brain and the emotional side of your brain. Um, you can kind of process out years of trauma that you aren't really even aware of. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, okay, if you've processed out the trauma that created this disposition to be like, to have this highly sensitive um, nervous system that
Hmm.
triggers to you that you are in danger every time a certain kind of situation that reminds you of the trauma in some way. If your personality is really your personality, or is it some, coping mechanism to try to resolve to try to address unresolved trauma? I didn't expect us to go this way at all,
No,
but
no, no. I love it. This is, yeah, what I'm all about. So I'm happy to dive in.
it's awesome.
I just don't want to be, I want to make sure if we keep using the word personality, we keep it within its bounds, because
Okay.
personality isn't just the way you behave. It's your, again, the core tendencies to want to behave a certain way. And then there's still that layer of characteristic adaptations, right? Like things like you may want to do something, but then you choose to do something else. And then I guess just to finish the model out so you can see like what I have working in my mind, there's the way you process it. So like you have a tendency, you have a characteristic adaptation that is actually the way you act in the world. Then you have what's called an objective biography. So facts of the matter. Like to anyone around, they saw this thing happen. But then there's also the self concept, how you perceive and process what's going on. That feeds back into personality and it's a loop.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're cutting off uh, updates to self concept from what actually happened, like if people are just saying, don't worry about it, deal with it, like, don't, like just move on kind of thing, then you're not going to be able to process that. And you're going to be stuck with whatever characteristic adaptation is helping you survive through that moment
Mm-hmm.
versus being able to process it, iterate on the whole thing, which means like you kind of need to experiment with your behaviors again to let your brain have the opportunity to see if there's a different outcome, right? Because like if you have behavior A results in terrible response A, and they say don't worry about it, move on. All your brain knows is if I ever do this again, I will have this, right? Like the training data is only one data point and it's terrible.
Mhm.
You need to be able to think through it and realize, like you said, it's not realistic. It's just what has happened once, and that's all I can expect. You need to be able to process it to update your model of the world and give it another go.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it could turn into a long-term personality shift as opposed to a local adaptation to your environment.
Yeah. And I would mostly agree with everything you're saying. And the one thing I think maybe a lot of people um like don't realize is a part of that processing part of the whole kind of, from the time that something happened to when you actually now have adopted these coping mechanisms or adaptations, and versus like when you actually process them out. A lot of people think, and me included at the time, that processing just means like think about it. Right?
Yeah.
And that if you just think about it and decide what you want to believe about it, then you can kind of get through it and like fully process it. And what took me a long time was that it didn't matter how much I thought about it.
Yeah.
Just, you know what I mean? Like, as someone, especially even after I went through the personal development phase, I was like all about beliefs, and I was all about like managing your thoughts and processing things out and journaling and all this stuff. And it wasn't working. Like, I wasn't changing. And I realized through my process was at some point I learned that I didn't have to feel things. I just had to like try to think them away, right? Like if I just think them away, I won't have to feel them. And what's true, what I learned is true, is that our emotions are like energy in motion. And if you don't process out the emotion, you actually can't integrate the learning that you have with your thoughts because your body still hasn't like released it.
Yeah, most definitely.
Right?
There's an open loop of something that is unaddressed. And if that, or you can think of an open loop as like an open wound too, literally in this case, right?
Right.
Like an open psychological wound that it's going to keep being sensitive if someone pokes it until you
Right.
heal it.
Right.
And yeah, that's just nerd side note. That's called the Zeigarnik effect. Like if you have uh if I tell you something that I could get cut off, you're going to be wondering what was he about to say until we talk again, and you're not like your memory around that will be very sharp. The same happens for like these kind of events, right?
I'm laughing because I literally just queued up a social media post about this effect for
Yeah.
Monday. I
There,
just like worked on it yesterday. And it starts with like, twinkle, twinkle, little star. Like, how many of you tried to finish that? And it is people like production studios, commercial,
yeah.
try to optimize on this effect that you want to close, your brain naturally wants to close the loop. And there are so many ways that we get stuck in our own loops, right? Like our never ending to-do lists,
Yep.
our, and so I talked in the post, I talk about how to like leverage it, right? To gain
Yes.
momentum. So that's why I'm laughing, but I wanna hear about how you're applying it to emotions and how that
Oh,
leads to.
I was just saying like a nerdy way to basically restate what you just said is you have an open loop until it is addressed, and it's not just thinking through it sometimes. There's many like there's many aspects to it. Like I just wanted to also say from what you were getting at earlier, it's not nature or nurture. It's both. It's nature and nurture. And there's emotional things that we can do. There's spiritual things that we can do. Like like yeah, depending on what it was, if it was a social thing that caused the trauma, practicing forgiveness in a way that like we don't have time to talk about right now, but like forgiveness is an attempt at closing the loop, if you want to think of it very simply. Um, because holding on to like the emotions of whatever the event was, and even if you were literally a pure victim, holding on to that keeps the wound open for so long. And there's we don't have enough time to dive into that. That's a very sensitive like door I just opened, but that's part of it, right? Like there's certain things you can do personally, like physically, emotionally, thinking through it, talking to other people that are beyond your situation that can provide other information, right? If you're trying to think your way out of it. If you're stuck in a loop, you're likely continually having the same thoughts, reinforcing the pain that you're in, justifying that you should be feeling that way, which doesn't ever help. So yeah, there's it's multifaceted.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what you said about it being, it's all the things. It's not just one thing is going to answer it.
Yeah.
Uh, Unfortunately, like one of the things that came up when you said that, that is one thing that I will say has been, um, I've come across it when you talk about like, oh, there's things you can do spiritually,
Hmm.
right? A lot of times, and I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, and I grew up in a Christian family, and my father would say things that the Christian community often says that I find that can sometimes um, get people stuck is like,
Yeah.
just give it to God, or if you just believe, these things, when you say it's all these things, and then you try to tell someone it's one thing, sometimes keeps people believing that they're being stuck is their lack of like faith, like their lack of connection with God. And I know you're also a believer. I know you're Christian.
Hmm.
I'm wondering, what your take on that is.
Well, specifically about the just give it to God, if it's in the context of like social trauma, if you want to call it that, like between people, not just some car crash or something, right? Um, there's problems even within, let's just say, the Christian community about what it means to give it to God. Um,
Mhm.
because there still needs to be some sort of justice in the situation. It's not just I forgive you, okay, I'm going to walk away. Um, there's a great book by Timothy Keller
Hmm.
called Forgive. Like if people are actually like having trouble, whoever's listening to this, with forgiving some person or some event, even themselves, it helped me uh, process actually a lot of what I didn't realize was unforgiveness and bitterness that just stuck around for different things.
Hmm.
And the just give it to God, it's an oversimplification of the ways in which you should give it to God. If you're a subscriber to that. And they're like, I don't know how much you want to go into that, but there still needs to be justice served. Otherwise, it is likely that the trauma will repeat itself. And justice is not vengeance. So like that's a whole other conversation. But the way the Batman tool belt, if you will, of how I process things is recognizing that whatever just happened, that's thrown my whole life off kilter, which tends to mean I'm going to go into different coping mechanisms, which for me I lost my father a while ago. I play video games and like I eat just disgusting, delicious foods, but terrible. All of those suppress my ability to actually heal. And say like one of the tools in the tool belt is physically getting myself right, like starting to eat cleaner because that reduces your base level stress in your body. So then
Mhm.
you're at least addressing that. Then stopping to mask, or not mask, but stop, not preventing the uh, ability to process it from coming up with things like video games,
Mhm.
removing that so I could actually be confronted or confront what I was going through,
Mhm.
and then have a spiritual model that helped guide me through it. All of those things together. It wasn't just one thing. Help.
Mhm.
Again, this is more personal, but this is I would suggest it works for everyone. That's the multifaceted approach that worked for me in that situation.
Mhm. Uh, this is the first time we've talked about this, so thank you for being so
Hmm.
vulnerable, and kind of sharing a very concrete example. You know, so many things about that because,
Yeah.
as I lost my husband at a very highly traumatic time for like the world, right? And so
Hmm.
I was surrounded by people that were dealing with their own trauma. Um, and, you know, it's going through that is similar to what you're talking about because you're talking about basically um, grief, I guess, is an aspect of any kind of traumatic event. Um,
Hmm.
and traumatic, I think people try to make trauma sound like a big thing. And basically, trauma is just anything that like feels highly um oh it's like the way I would define it anyway is something that just signals to you that all your sense of safety is kind of gone, right? It's it's threatening to your sense of safety.
Hmm.
Um, and so when you lose even a job, right? If you lose a even a partner in a divorce, or if you um, anything like that is going to feel highly traumatic. But when you're a child and your sense of safety comes from your parent, and your parent is unable to show up for you to give you emotional safety, that's also highly traumatic because you're a child, right? And you don't have your
Yeah.
own, you don't have any autonomy. You completely rely on this person for your sense of self and the sense of the world. Um, like your sense of, I don't want to say your sense of, I would say your sense of self. Like
No,
what,
it is externalized sense of self and security. They are your security, like
right,
100%. Yeah.
right. And so sometimes that means physical harm. I'm very against corporal punishment. I know that's highly like um, I feel like it shouldn't be, but sometimes that can be controversial topic to talk about.
Hmm.
But even just a parent, not even maliciously, just unaware of their own mental health struggles that don't allow them to be present emotionally with their kids. But one of those things is because they have some traumatic event that doesn't allow them to be present with their own emotions because they're doing things like maybe video games or TV or overeating or
Hmm.
whatever to cope with those emotions that they don't allow themselves to feel, right? And so now that is highly traumatic. And so all these traumatic experiences lead to us having to cope with it in some way. If we weren't taught how to do it or modeled how to do it, or we don't have the wherewithal to like feel our feelings because
Yeah. Well, it's
it's
hard.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. There's a, I'm a very visual person. I don't know if this will translate audibly, but when I was, yeah, dealing with some stuff like a few years ago, and like I would visualize it literally as a downward spiral. And back then I was still, I don't drink anymore, but back then I would still like just have a beer or like a glass of whiskey or something. And that like, if you think about a downward spiral, like, oh, I see where this is going. Let me play a video game and just exit out, or
Right.
take a drink and exit out of this, and or at least push pause on it for a while.
Yeah.
Um, I started removing all of those things. I was like, it was kind of a scary thought, but let's just see where this goes. Like, what's actually at the bottom? And there's a secular and a spiritual way for me to describe it, but like at the bottom, I would say God was waiting for me there. I would also say that I'm now able to fully confront what was at the root of what was pulling me down in that spiral and address it so that it didn't have as much gravity to it.
Would you say that what was pulling you down there was like a belief? What was it? What was it?
Well, there's triggers, right? Like depends on what it is in your life. But I was very sleep deprived and highly sensitive to any sort of input and anxious, right? Like it was a stressful situation. So it would, like, if something frustrating happened, it would just be like, boom, starting to go down. And
Mhm.
I just let it actually fully like run its course instead of like cutting off and I don't even know what you want to call it. Yeah, instead of preventing it from doing what it needed to do, let the virus run its course so you could actually like process it, get a fever, all that stuff, deal with it, and build up antibodies. So when it comes again, you're not going to get the same virus. That is what happened. And I would, yeah, again, depending on how spiritual you want to get, I would say there was a great comforter waiting for me at the bottom, which was greater than any of the other off ramps to prevent that process from finishing out.
So when you say at the bottom, was the bottom just that the all the emotion, the grief, the sorrow,
It's
the
yeah, the
pain?
culmination, right? Like, because it's, I don't know how you experience pain or grief or just dark times, but um, if you want to say a traumatic event and like you're going into a cycle of, oh, it actually came up, am I going to process it or not? Um, Allowing it to run its course. I forgot. Can you say your question again? I got a bit lost in myself.
Well, because you said you would go down the spiral.
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
then at
that's right.
the
It
bottom of the
progressively
spiral,
builds. So it's not like I don't start at a peak state of grief or pain or whatever it is. It tends to like spiral. Like you'll have something that's a trigger, and then it'll open this whole, like the catacombs of your memory of whatever that was, if you're going back to a past thing. Or if you're in a negative mind, if I'm just gonna talk about me, if I was in a negative mind space, I would just start adding to it sometimes, right? And reifying why that is the reality of the situation. Um, but instead of interrupting that and letting it actually like get to where it needed to go, it gets progressively more painful for me. And then, but I like held on like as the world was rattling. Like it was a weird experience, honestly, knowing that that's what was happening and expecting something to be at the bottom. I wasn't sure, and that's what I found there was a great comforter, but also resolution and ability to see like what was actually at the root of it all. And then now that I had, if you want to tie this back into personality, a snapshot of a truth of an like the objective facts of the situation, I could process it more honestly, and not more honestly, more precisely. I could apply the right tools, right? I could like journal if I needed a journal to like, oh, this was untapped. Now I know that I need to think about it more, or wow, I'm really physically thrown off. And this is just an overreaction to a minor stimuli. Great. Now I can go deal with that.
yeah. So um, when you talk about tying it back to personality, right? One of the things that I heard you say was like you would eat lots of sugars and you would maybe have a drink and maybe you would, play video games in the personality model, right? That
Mm-hmm.
sounded like you would relate that to impulsivity. But would you say that before that, your impulsivity was low before the traumatic event?
Those were characteristic adaptations. I'm very high in positive emotions. Like in general, I'm very optimistic and see the sunny side of most things, but there wasn't sunny sides to the like reality that was happening.
Hmm.
So it was a characteristic adaptation of coping to prevent me coming face to face with like the darkness of what was going on.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I, I guess I would say, I don't know. Okay, this is, we got into kind of like your spiritual journey as you talked about it, because it is part of the healing process for a lot of people. I would say, you know, before we're adults, right? That we
Mhm.
have access to a lot of ways to buffer out our feelings.
Mhm.
We don't have any, right? At least I didn't, because I lived in a very strict household. So it's not like I could leave the house. It's not like I could play video games or,
Mhm.
do almost any kind of buffering activity. Maybe just music. Maybe just download music was probably all I could do when
Mhm.
I was, in my teens. So maybe that kind of forced me into um, facing my,
Yeah.
spiritual beliefs at a young age. Um, and I would say, interestingly, then when the highly traumatic experience happened, as an adult, when Juan passed, I would say, like, I actually also don't drink at all now.
Mhm.
Like I kind of got to the point with drinking where there's enough research that says that even one drink is going to affect your brain, and I'm just not about to like do myself the disservice
Mhm.
of hurting my brain in that way for any reason. So, and it's interesting, that was actually easy for someone like me to do, and at the same time like eye-opening to see how often I had incorporated that as part of my like every not every day, but like if I was on vacation on the
Yeah.
beach, all of a sudden I'd be like,
How did
supposed to be
this
having
drink
a
get in
drink
my
right now.
hand? Yeah.
Supposed to be having a drink right now. And so it was weird not to. It like was weird actually
Yeah.
to not because like I needed it, or I don't know if I even like maybe wanted it. It was just like that was just a weird experience. Just I had never, and that's probably how a lot of smokers feel too. Like supposed to be having a cigarette right now.
Yeah. Those are
Yeah.
triggers, right? Like you have
Yeah.
those locational triggers.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
a whole other tangent. But before I decided to like completely alcohol, I would have a drink every now and
Mhm.
like I would have a glass of wine, or I would with dinner, or I would um toast at New Year's, whatever.
Mhm.
But after he passed, I started to notice, but it took me a while to notice
Mhm.
that every now and then, if it was a tough night, the nights were the toughest for me. Um, it gets quiet, you don't, Mia's not demanding anything of me anymore, and it's quiet and I'm alone and it's dark, and it's like the house feels emptier.
Mhm.
And it's that slowing down all of a sudden forces you to kind of face some stuff. And
Mhm.
what I noticed is that one day I just happened to have that bottle of wine in the cabinet, and I was like, oh, I'll just have a glass to relax because I'm not sleeping.
Mhm.
Um, right. And so maybe it'll be good to get some good sleep. Wine makes me sleepy. Um, and then I noticed it it was more frequent. Not that it was every night anyway, but I just noticed it was more frequent than it was before he passed, right? Like I had never had a glass of wine alone ever before that. Like it
Hmm.
was just no, I guess I just saw no purpose in it. It was more like a social thing. It was like a celebratory thing. Like we're
Hmm.
celebrating something. Um, and then it became like we're not celebrating anything. We're just kind of like feeling not good.
Yeah.
And
Taking a pain pill.
it didn't, I have to be honest, like it did not feel like that's what I was doing
Hmm.
until like I started to like track it, right?
It's hard to notice until you start removing the pain pill from your life of what its purpose was actually
So,
serving, right?
right. Because
Yeah.
once I tracked it and I was like, oh, well, that's like I had 3 bottles and now, and not that it was that often, like it was a few months later, but I was surprised that they were gone because there were times that I would have 3 bottles sitting in my cabinet for a year, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And now it's like a few months in and they're gone, or a couple of months in and they're gone. And I'd be like, that's more than it was before. So maybe I won't get any this time. But then when I didn't get any, you're right. That's when it was like, oh, like I really want a glass right now. What
Yeah.
happens if I don't have it? And then I
You're,
noticed,
you're progressing further down the spiral. Yeah.
guess what I noticed next? Now I want all of a sudden, and before Juan died, I never wanted any kind of sugar at all.
Hmm.
Um, and then all of a sudden, I had sugar in the house because actually this started because when someone passes and it's the pandemic, all people know how to do is like send you. Oh, because it was also Mia's birthday right after he passed. So they sent a bunch of like cake, and cupcakes and whatever else. And so it was in the house. It had never been in the house before. And it was late at night. It was like I started to recognize the pattern. So it was late at
Hmm.
night. And when wine's not available, all of a sudden sugar is, and that seems all of a sudden very attractive. And it does to me anyway, it became clear that my body was craving dopamine,
Yeah.
right? And so because it was like low, like, and so eventually I started dancing, which is really great actually for trauma. It's
Yeah.
so wonderful, such a wonderful tool to like move that energy out of your body and be like very in tune and present with your body. And it also generates a lot of dopamine, healthy dopamine,
Hmm.
except when you start to notice there that all of a sudden you're like, when I don't dance, right? It's like I feel the same way that I did when I don't have the glass of
Hmm.
wine,
And that's
right?
why it's just one of the tools. Yeah. You need to
Yeah.
bring all the tools to a situation like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so once that was all gone, actually, was when you have to, come to face with yourself. And at the time, honestly, I didn't, there's only so much grief your body can take anyway. And
Hmm.
so you're gonna, it's gonna like pour out of you, whether you want it to or not. And you think that is, I am grieving, I am processing. There's so much already that I've done already. And, and I just wanted it to stop was part of the problem. Like it's too much. I just wanted to stop. So there were things that I was doing to try to minimize how much because it was like I was years
Yeah.
into grieving, right? Like, and it felt like it wouldn't end. And part of it was I had already lived so much of my life suppressing a lot of my emotions. And so I think that is part of why when we talk, I think about like, well, I had so many uh, things ways that I had to try to cope with my inability to process out stuff.
Hmm.
That maybe you're right. Maybe there is like some core personality, right? That I'm not familiar with because I've done so many other things to kind of
Yeah.
uh, to hide it because not to hide it purposefully, just because to kind of
You're
deal with.
compensating for life events. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think that somebody, and maybe you have the answer for this or not, but um, somebody that has had this type of experience and they are starting down some healing journey and they're starting to realize, oh, my, um, you know, introvertedness or my social anxiety or my neuroticism, these are actually just manifestations of a lot of trauma.
Hmm.
How do I get to connect with who I really am and what my personality really is? Because at that point, I guess I would say you get
I
to
would say it
choose.
doesn't really matter. Like
Right.
you're trying to get connected to your personality. You're working with tendencies at the moment. Let's just call it that. That is your starting place. Let's figure out what's helping you and what's preventing you from getting to where you want to be and work with that.
Hmm.
That's the goal, right? The goal isn't necessarily to like have a get an A plus on my I know my personality test. It's to A plus on I am now living a purposeful, joyful life unhindered by this baggage I was just dragging before. And I
Hmm.
do want to say for the record, I'm definitely not suggesting that the approach is to go cold turkey on every single tool you have
Yeah.
to at least lengthen the fuse, right? If you want to call it that, like if there's like an explosive realization at the bottom of the spiral, like you said, there's a lot of grief or something that you have to deal with in traumatic situations. Day one is not the time just to be like, I'm just going to sit here and take it all. Like, maybe it's okay to be like slightly distracted and interrupt that just so it's not as, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't leave deep scars, right? Like
Yeah.
there's definitely something to be said about slow rolling that and not diving straight into it. But I think at some point the truth should be faced full on.
Yeah. I think so. I, I guess I'll close the loop on that because I just realized I left that open. It was when I got to the point where I finally was face to face with pain, like the deep pain. Um, I realized, oh, my foundation was really shaken because while before what got me through was my faith, now I I prayed for something, the most important prayer I ever prayed, right? And I felt that sense of abandonment. And so that is when I started to recognize that I had deep wounds around abandonment that open. So my that trauma actually opened up, um, all the other trauma that came before it.
Yeah.
And I would say that part of why people are afraid to feel their feelings is because they do think that they're just gonna like spiral into a deeper depression. Even me, like I definitely felt like there's an immediate response to trauma that is just natural, that it will come out whether you want it to or not. And it feels so heart wrenching and difficult. And when you think about when you feel yourself going there again, it feels like I'll never come out of that place, right? And so you try to kind of stop it or suppress it or and actually what you said is there is you can kind of go through it. Like there is another side to it. Like it does kind of leave your body because you're only going to be able to take it in small doses anyway, right?
Mhm.
Like um and you can say, okay, I've done some work today, right? This
Mhm.
is the work, and we'll do some more tomorrow, right? But the coping mechanisms, it's also impossible to kind of stop them immediately, right? Like
Oh
they're just
yeah.
because they're a pattern too, and you've taught yourself that pattern helps, and so what serves you is hard to stop, and so you're just actually building a new pattern when you're trying to actually process out this stuff. So
Yeah.
I actually don't think that people, even if they wanted to kind of stop cold turkey, um, like could like you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's dangerous. If you're not like with any habit, if you're trying just to stop one without a plan to replace it with something, something typically just as bad tends to fill it. Like you said, cupcakes and cake was the first thing
Right.
because there wasn't I'm correct me if I'm wrong, it didn't seem like there was an exit plan other than let's stop drinking the wine, right? So then that
Right.
means something there's a void to be filled. And there's just kind of adjacent to that. I always have to plug this book. I think I've told you about it many times. It's Upward Spiral. That's why I have this visual of spirals in my mind by Alex
Okay.
Korb. He's a neuroscientist that has like looked into how to combat depression. So and like you said, you fall into certain patterns. So like depression is just these symptoms. This is a way oversimplification, but a version of depression is experiencing that those kind of symptoms over a very long, sustained period of time. Oversimplification. Please give me grace, people who are listening that have dealt with clinical depression. But there are patterns, like you said, associated with it, which is part of a region of your brain that has like hardwired patterns in it. To override those patterns, you need serotonin, the happy, good feeling chemical, which you get from exercising. And that's fuel for like the superhero part of your brain that overrides the pattern part of your brain, right? So like you needed to dance to give you the fuel to do whatever else you needed to do to adjust those patterns. That's why it wasn't a one-stop shop of dancing. That was like, okay, let's go fill up the tank and now I can actually do the work that needs to be done. But you have to fill up the tank. That's why I keep saying it's many tools. There's many things all a part of the
Mhm.
process.
Yeah. Because I know this sounds cliche, but it is mind, body, and spirit, right? Like mind,
Yeah.
body, and soul. Um, you can't just do one of those things. We are all those things in one.
Mm-hmm. And they're all
Right.
connected. Yeah.
Exactly.
They're not, you can't compartmentalize it.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's
And
why you'll see people that are going through tough times have physical manifestations of that, right? Like
right.
stress is the root of most diseases. So like they
Hmm.
might actually start having things that make things worse happen in their body pretty soon if it's not addressed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Being in survival mode, having your nervous system be in survival mode all the time is a great way to get sick, right?
Yeah.
Like, um, definitely was a learning for me because what happened to me even it was one of those things that I was using to, get dopamine was achieving. Right? When you achieve, feels so good. You feel good about yourself. And so you work more so you can get it. And then what ends up happening is you create all this additional stress in your life, right? And then now you're in survival mode and eventually you hit a breaking point, you burn out, and then you have to come face to face with yourself anyway.
Hmm. And then Tony Robbins has a good quote about that I don't think he would apply in this way, but it's success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. So like that I would say in some cases like that, if the success isn't really directional and built on a foundation of stability, right? Like it seemed like in some cases success is trying to get you away from something, but there's nothing there, right? Like as soon as you get to the top, you'll realize, oh, I'm not standing on anything. I got to address what's going on here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of are you running from something or are you running towards something?
Yeah.
It's definitely a whole other energy. And, you know, the if I reflect on that time, right, when I became burnt out and all that, I think part of it is also when you are not in alignment with that purpose, like you talk about, running towards something or running away from something. I didn't necessarily recognize when the shift happened because in my mind, I was working towards, you know, creating a better life for my daughter. And then at some point, I think it became clear that I was running from the life of poverty and lack that I lived in my childhood, right? And I think that maybe it's it's in the self-abandonment that you recognize that. It's like when you have abandoned self, that's when you know that you've gone from running towards something to running from something. And abandonment of self, I would say, is the misalignment with your value system, right? Like with
Mhm.
who who you yeah, with your value system. Like, and one of the things that I valued were things like, you know, family, like spending time with my family. I valued the ability to empower people to accept themselves as they were. And I don't think I've ever spoken about that publicly, but and this is controversial because some people believe that the aesthetic industry is all about making you feel good. And yet, for me, I felt like the aesthetic industry was pointing out all of people's flaws, women primarily, aesthetic flaws, in order to um, get them to spend money to make changes to their aesthetic so that they feel good enough or feel good about themselves, as opposed to empowering them to accept themselves and love themselves as they are so that they can, um, really like value who they are as a person for their
Mhm.
passions, for their, for their heart, for their soul, um, as opposed to some standard of aesthetic that an industry has predetermined. And so that like incongruence of my value system was the moment I probably should have recognized, like, and maybe that was the moment. So I'm not spending time with my daughter. I'm working on something I don't believe in. And so now I'm just running from my fear of being able to provide the life
Mhm.
that I want for her that I didn't have, as opposed to running towards creating a life that, you know, that I want to provide for my daughter, like full of possibility, full of, um, options and all of that.
Mhm.
And so when you said it, what was coming up for you? Like, what were you thinking when you said, um, you know,
The
the Tony
success without
Robbins quote?
the success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. It was that like yeah, undirected success is not actually success. So it's like it's kind of a counterintuitive statement to begin with because it's by his definition that it's not success, right? Like when you were just talking, I was thinking about like a connect the dots kind of picture, right? Like if you actually keep connecting it, then there is a goal there, right? Like you're going to make a pretty giraffe or something. But in your case, it sounded like it kept resetting after you connected to the next dot. Like, because the
Mm,
success was just to get to the next dot, the next raise or promotion or the next thing to provide for your family, without having that connection to the true meaning in your life, right? Which is like if you hold that dot in place and never let go, now the picture will actually become more and more valuable and beautiful as you build on it. I don't know if that analogy
yeah. So
tracks well, but
when you mentioned the dots for the big picture, actually
Mhm.
what came to mind was purpose, right?
Mhm.
The idea that it doesn't matter like how you go about fulfilling your purpose. It doesn't matter what your actual job is necessarily. It's the purpose that drives the work that you do. Like, your
If you're
purpose.
unconnected from your purpose, everything you do is gonna feel empty. But if
Yeah.
you have the purpose, you can find fulfillment in the most menial things if they're aligned with that purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, I don't know how we kind of got here, but I love that to end on that too, because
Yeah.
ultimately that is probably my uh, greatest passion and what I feel is connected to my purpose. And it's about helping people really get clearer on their purpose and then to pursue it courageously. And I think it is that sense of fulfillment because you are clear on it. And many times, you know, we lose sight of it. And maybe we had a sense of purpose
Yeah.
and maybe it turned into running from something. And so I love that. I love that we got there.
Habits, even good ones, can turn into complacency, right? And it just becomes like the going through the motions. And even if you were doing the
Exactly.
thing that was aligned with your purpose in the same exact way as you, if you're not no longer connected to it, it can feel empty.
Mhm.
So yeah, we always got to check in with ourselves.
Yes. And when you say no longer connected to it, it goes back to what you were saying about emotions too. Like that is how we connect with it, is to be emotionally connected, not just in our thoughts, but like, and spiritually as well, right? Like to be able to, um, like really feel the sense of gratitude, to really feel the sense of purpose, as opposed to just kind of like check things off a list and go through the motions because you think that's what you should be doing, to connect with the calling, right? That soul's calling to what you're
Yeah,
working.
the through line through your life. We can deviate from it, and it you feel the coldness of it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say, since we're wrapping on that, what would you say? I would love for you to share with the audience what you feel your purpose is.
To help people achieve, like, yeah, I guess it's kind of similar to yours. Get in alignment with their purpose and live it courageously and giving them the tools to do so specifically. I'm a tools guy. I know that's my calling, is to give people tools that make their life better,
Yeah.
objectively better, right? Like and like there's like you said, like the subjective, maybe societally defined, be more beautiful, have more money or something. Obviously there's relationships between those and like general health and well-being, but there's something more meaningful than both of those, and everyone has it. They just need to find it and then know what to how to live in their body and their soul that can get them to where they need to be. And I think that's my calling, knowing that at one person at a time, it'll create ripple effects, right? Like they're going to be a light in their little area, maybe just their neighborhood, and their neighborhood's going to become brighter, right? And then it
Yeah.
might have someone else become brighter, and it just virtuous cycle.
I love that. I love that. And what I love about what you said too, is that it's actually very similar to yours. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, we're bringing it to life in different ways. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people think about purpose as like, what career should I pursue? What job should I have? And, we have similar purpose statements. And yet, you were developing a platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
A software platform. And I'm coaching people one on one. And yet, what calls us to do these things are, you know, the same. And yet, the way it manifests is different. And when you're aligned with your purpose, it doesn't only come out, right, in your work or career, it comes out in everything you do throughout your day. Like
Mm-hmm.
you said, creating like little lights in different communities by
Yeah.
touching their lives, right? That's awesome. So maybe we could link in the bio or the show notes, or maybe we can even say what the link is if anybody actually wants to get more insights on what their personality tendencies are. And I know you said that there's some other aspects of the questionnaire where they can
Mm-hmm.
maybe gain some
Yeah.
more awareness.
I can give you links to two things. One is the full scary version of the test, which is just a lot of text if you want to read that, but it has cool features like connecting with your significant other or a friend, and it tells you superpowers and vulnerabilities of different aspects of your personality. There's a simpler one that just gives you like a 2-page result of your superpowers and vulnerabilities in your personality, your how you're currently managing your personal energy, and to what degree are you burnt out. And it's just a quick starting point for you to assess your world from different aspects. So I can give both of those, and I would please caveat them both. You want to do the scary version of the quick hitter.
Yeah. Some of these assessments can be really overwhelming, but I think if you
Yeah.
really take the time to dig deeper, it does give you much more accurate, insights. And I think I did the longer version with.
Oh yeah. Yes, you did. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of course. I'm definitely a tools and research nerd myself. So I was excited to kind of see, what kinds of insights you could glean from my responses and all that. And you just reminded me that I have yet to convince my boyfriend to take it so we can cross-reference. But I would also love for anyone that is taking it, if they wanted to see, because you had a tool to see compatibility as it relates to your coach client relationship too, right?
That was under development. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
not out there right now.
That's like next version. I would love to see what that looks like too.
Mm-hmm.
So this was awesome. Thanks, Tyler. I never know where these conversations will lead, but I think I'm a highly spiritual person, and I always say that exactly what it was supposed to be talked about was talked about. Like that was what people needed to hear today. And I know for me it was great to like hear this different side of you also, and all this extensive knowledge that I didn't necessarily know you had. We've only ever talked about the personality aspect of things, now that I think. So this was fascinating to have that discussion as it relates to all things. We covered like all sorts of aspects of personal development, from trauma to emotions to habits to purpose. I love it. This was great.
Let it flow. Like I was telling people, luckily Diana's being a good moderator and cutting us off. Otherwise, we could be here all day. So for your sake, I think we're ending it on a good note, and it definitely went where it needed to go.
Thanks so much, Tyler.
Yeah.
Until next time, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Courage and Purpose. I hope today's insights inspired you to take bold action and align your life and career with what truly matters to you. If you're ready to dive deeper, I invite you to download my free Action Indicator Assessment, a powerful tool to help you uncover what's holding you back and take the next step towards clarity and confidence. Just visit www.lifeonpurpose.coach/action indicator to get started today. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use a little extra courage on their journey. Until next time, stay true to your purpose, lead with courage, and keep thriving. I'll see you in the next episode.